Fresh air, longer days, a chance to reset. This season, let therapy be part of your spring cleaning. Clearing mental clutter, shaking off stuckness, and building something better. Grow Therapy helps you get there. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 15th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Well, good morning and afternoon wherever you are in the world. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel for your Rock Art Podcast, episode 163. I'm honored and blessed to be here, and we've got some remarkable heavy hitters, some cutting-edge stuff for you this time. We have Dr. Christian Bentz and Ewa Dutkiewicz, and we're going to talk about some things, some of the more remarkable things that they've discovered. We're conducting this particular interaction. They're in Berlin, Germany. And let's kick it off by asking them, the first million-dollar question. How the heck did you get involved in this niche? And what prompted you to get involved with these particular studies? And either of you can begin this discussion. How's that?
I think I will start because this study is result of my PhD that I started in 2011 at the University of Tübingen, where I had the great opportunity to study the markings on the Swabian origination figurines firsthand. And this is the data collection that Chris and we built this study on. So it started basically as a PhD program. And so I was working on this, and Chris was also in Tübingen at that time, and he was interested in what I'm doing. So we met and we discussed a little bit and had a couple of beers while doing so. And we thought we have to work together and keep these questions going.
Ewa, what caused you to get into this academic niche, this platform in anthropology, archaeology, cross-cultural studies? What, as a youth or as a, someone who emerged, what prompted that?
Well, how do you get into archaeology? There's
exactly.
so many different ways. So I wanted to study arts and become an artist. But while preparing for it, I discovered that actually I'm not so much interested in constantly doing it, but more learning about it. And then I thought about what studies could I take, and I landed at archaeology and started doing it. When I began here, actually I started my studies here in Berlin. I started with Near Eastern archaeology and had many courses on this, and prehistory was my minor subject. And I was also learning Sumerian and Akkadian language, and I was not very successful with it. I'm not a very good philologist, but I have a little bit of experience with it. And then after a couple of years of studying this, I figured that I want to go deeper into human history, and changed completely and went to Tübingen and started studying Paleolithic archaeology. And as you know, Tübingen is the center of studying early art, one of the centers in Europe. And after being there, going on excavations, I got the opportunity to work on this figurines. And this is where the circle kind of closed, because then I was back at the arts. And it was Nicholas Conrad, my PhD supervisor, who thought that this would be a nice topic for me. And I said, well, actually, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. Yeah.
Remarkable. Just so our listenership understands, we're talking about some of the earliest art and the earliest sort of communication on Earth. Am I correct?
Well, yes, it's the evidence for figurative art worldwide, around 40,000 years old. And so we now, Chris and I, were working on the markings, but actually the markings are on artworks, predominantly also on tools and personal ornaments, but the artworks, this is what the region is most famous for. And these are perfectly carved Ice Age animals and human-animal hybrid creatures that these people 40,000 years ago created in mammoth ivory. And yeah, they are just perfect.
And some of our listeners would certainly be familiar with the internationally renowned figure of, they call it the Lion Man, and then an adherent figure, and then some of the portable art that is created to look like the mammoth elephants, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. So the most important thing about this art, besides its beauty, obviously, is that it gives us a glimpse into the worldview of these people. These humans, they lived during the Ice Age here. It was 40,000 years ago. They were hunter-gatherers. So they lived from what the environment gave them through hunting and gathering. But what we see in the figurines is not what they ate. They did not depict what they ate. They depicted the largest animals, the most dangerous animals in the form of mammoths and lions predominantly. We do have also other figurines from that time, but the mostly depicted animal species is mammoth and lion. So it's clear that this is not a natural depiction of their surroundings, but it's a choice they made for reasons we don't know. And particularly obvious is this cultural imprint when we look at the human-animal hybrids in the form of the lion man. This is a creature that does not exist in reality. So this is something these humans made up, and they created it in the form of statues. So yeah, and besides the fantastic markings that we were studying, this is a very important part also for our argument why there is a cultural choice behind these markings.
And these are figures and subjects that, at least in some instances, are what have been called in the literature indexical animals. Animals. They pick the topmost predators and the most fabulous creatures as their subject matter. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, you can say so. I mean, we do have also evidence for like smaller animals like bird, fish, for example. So it's not only about size and danger, but it plays a big role. And especially in the lion man, where we see this connection between a human being and a lion, both top predators of the time. So yeah, it's something that maybe people identified themselves with these dangerous animals. Maybe they worship them, whatever. It's very difficult to say what these people thought, but obviously there is something. When you identify yourself with a lion, obviously you want to have its strength and its power. So I don't think it's too exaggerated to assume ideas like that.
Let's jump to Christian. Can you contribute something in terms of your background in this, let's say, this biographical snapshot?
Yeah, hi. So I came into the picture in 2017. I was part of a working group which was called Words and Bones. Very fitting if you think about it in hindsight.
Oh, yes,
so this was under the leadership, under the leadership of Katharina Haverty and also Gerhard Jäger. And they wanted to bring together people from archaeology, linguistics, even genetic studies to work together. And in this context, I came to Tübingen and I started to also visit the museum and saw the figurines and saw the marks on these figurines. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I have always been interested in language evolution, so I wanted to work on this. And then our back then scientific coordinator, Hugo Reyes Centeno, he is from the US originally. He also went back as a professor to the US. Back then he said, oh yeah, there is a PhD student working on this, Ewa Dutkiewicz. So that's how we got together.
How you connected.
And yeah.
What prompted you to as a youth or as a up-and-coming person to choose this discipline, to choose archaeology, anthropology, rock art, symbolism, comparative ethnology of foragers? That's a rather esoteric
Well,
question.
I didn't actually. So
okay. It shows you, right?
Well, I chose to study linguistics, right? So I'm a computational linguist. And what I'm interested in and what I've always been fascinated by is the diversity of human languages and how they work. Okay. Why they are different and how we can measure the difference between languages and how we can also find the universal features of languages. So that's my background. That's what I brought to the table. And in this context, I think there is a question lurking in the background. And this is, we have diverse languages and writing systems. So we have graphical expressions that are used to represent spoken languages. And these span a space of possibilities. And I'm wondering, how can we measure the space? How can we understand how big the space is and to what extent it overlaps with other kinds of communication systems, be it animal communication or other types of symbol systems, which are not linguistic systems. So yeah, this is my background. And this is why I was fascinated to try and understand when we started to concatenate signs and to encode information.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Well, this is a good place to have a break. See you in the flip-flop, gang. Well, welcome back to your Rock Art Podcast. We are blessed and honored to have two of the most remarkable researchers that we've had talking about the earliest forms of marking and perhaps a pre-literate or a start of language and a better understanding of these figures that are some of the earliest representational and associated art objects in the world. So Ewa and Christian, and they're coming to us from Berlin, Germany. So maybe give us an understanding of how the problem of this sort developed, gained access to this assemblage, and what's the database for it? Where was it? Had this been discovered before? And what means did you have for analyzing such data? And how did you come to begin to recognize the orderliness and repetition and sort of the conclusion that this was a pre-form of writing or communication?
So starting with the data collection, data acquisition, I mean, I'm, as a trained archaeologist, I only believe in the originals. So my start was, or my approach was to, of course, read the literature before, but then also make a first-hand examination of the objects. So the markings, they are known for a long time now since their discovery. I mean, they are very obvious. So also Gustav Rieck, the first who excavated the Vogelherd cave where many of these objects come from, already saw them and already thought about what they could mean. He had the ideas of like hunting tallies. Then Joachim Hahn, who discovered the Adorant figurine from Geisenklösterle, he also saw these markings. His ideas went more to the realm of calendars and moon observation devices, like notes of such observations. So people had many ideas about what these sort of markings can mean. There are also many other researchers like Alexander Marshak, who also had many ideas about what these markings could mean. So I'm definitely not the first working on that. However, my approach was at the beginning to step away in the first instance to try to decode and understand their meaning, right? So I thought it would be maybe helpful to step back a little bit and just try to observe patterns, try to observe how these markings behave in the different caves. Do I find signs that are very special for one cave or one object type or something like this. Also, Joachim Hahn already did stuff like that. But after Nick Conrad's very long ongoing excavation, and he found so many more objects, I thought it would be a good idea to revise this material in these terms. So this is how I started, and I mean, as I said, I succeeded in this case. I really succeeded to all the objects in the original. So with a microscope, looking for, so I put them all under the microscope with light that comes really from the side, so you really see a lot of these markings. And I was actually able to discover new markings, even on the other end, that were not described before. So this is how I started, and I counted every line, I measured them. So I was really obsessed with these lines. And then when Chris and I made this sort of really into also an online database that we developed, which is signbase.org, if you like to check it out. It's open access, so you can look at all the objects and where they come from with the literature, in which museum they are found. And this is how we started. And Chris, maybe you want to continue about how we got to these ideas?
Yeah, sure. So the first point I had was that we need a certain type of syntax we are using for these marks so that I can do computational analysis. So essentially we need sequences of standardized signs. So we had to come up with the syntax. This took quite a bit of time to understand, okay, how can we encode what we have on the artifacts, the different kinds of sign types, if they're linearly arranged or if it's just an area that is filled, somehow you have to distinguish between these. And once we came up with the syntax, we put this into the database, and then you have sequences. And essentially you can apply algorithms you use in computational linguistics to then work with these sequences and see how different they are from one another, what types of statistical features they have. And this is then when we really started to work with them statistically and computationally.
Fantastic. So, Dr. Bentz, when you began working with computational linguistics, what correlations, what classifications were obvious or not so obvious? What were the sort of the categories of the figures that jumped out at you in terms of, was there correlations with these signs and certain classes or types or subtypes of this assemblage or not?
Yeah, so this was one of the questions we had. Can we essentially predict the complexity of the sequences by using meta information? Like, for instance, the size of an artifact. You would expect that maybe on a bigger artifact, you have longer sequences. I mean, you have more space, right? So you have longer sequences. Maybe these could be more complex or less complex, depending on the size of the artifact. Then you could have fragmented artifacts. So something is missing, might mean there is less information. And you have other meta information, such as the type of artifact. Is it that figurines are different from tools? Is it that personal ornaments are different from figurines and tools? So we had all of these meta information in the database that we could use to try and predict when do we find higher complexity or lower complexity of the sequences. And what turned out was kind of surprising to me, namely that basically only the type of artifact we are looking at is really a significant predictor. So figurines have the sequences with the highest information density, the highest complexity, if you will, higher than tools. And tools have somewhat higher complexity than what you find on the musical instruments, the flutes. So these people have really chosen the artifacts and the types of artifacts to apply these sign sequences to. And this is, I think, a solid result that comes out of these statistics. So we can at least say there was a deliberate choice of when they applied certain sequences with a certain complexity.
I understand from my reading of some of these articles, superficially certainly, that some artifacts had what might be called a lunar tally.
It could be, but yeah.
Yeah, but that was so that these are some, like, let's say, ideas that are plausible in my point of view, that these people observed time and observed lunar cycles and kind of noted it down, but that is not what we're going in this study. We really said, like, no, we will not give interpretations, because it's a purely statistical approach.
So you're trying to, on a preliminary nature, categorize, quantify, and look for statistically significant associations, so you can grasp or grapple with the data set as it's presented and leave meaning on the side.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's more of a bottom-up approach. So we try to see, okay, are there any kind of significant patterns in the data? Can we say that, for instance, in a certain cave, we only find certain signs, right?
Yes.
And once you have such patterns, you can maybe use them to try and distinguish different kinds of hypotheses. So if you want to argue, for instance, that some of these signs are used to encode information about the group of people, you would need to find that the signs are used differently in different places. And that is not really a strong pattern we have, for example, in this data, right? So I think you can try to narrow down certain hypotheses, but the problem is, and this is a fundamental problem of this type of research, if we really want to pin down the meanings, we have the problem that there will always be certain hypotheses that are still open that we cannot distinguish from one another, right? So I think there will always be a little bit of uncertainty left. So, for instance, if you say, okay, we have the other end figurine, and we have certain numbers of signs occurring, like 12 or 13, you can take this and say, that confirms the hypothesis that this is about lunar months. But actually, that's not quite true, because you can show that there is a significant occurrence of certain numbers, but that could be driven by different kinds of causes, right? So you can say, okay, we have some evidence that these people have chosen certain numbers over other numbers. I think that's something we can test. But then really connecting it to such an interpretation, that is still, there will always be something that could also be interpreted in a different way, I think.
Right. So what we're talking about is multiple working hypotheses, different explanatory platforms, the data that's driven or recognized cross-culturally and over significant geographical spreads. Am I correct or no?
The data that we have analyzed is actually from a relatively narrow geographic area.
Okay,
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the time span is quite long. It's like 5,000 to 10,000 years about. But the geographical realm is quite narrow. It's only the Swabian Jura, so the 4 caves of the Swabian Jura. So they are very close to each other.
Okay.
But the time span is quite long.
Yeah. I think I got it. Well, we have another good place to break, gang. See you in the flip-flop. Welcome back, gang. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel, the MC of this robust brain trust. And we're on episode 163 of the Rock Art Podcast. We have Dr. Bentz and Dr. Dutkiewicz in Berlin, Germany. And we're talking about the origination. We're talking about the patterning of embedded sort of earliest elements of some form of pre-language and communication. And so here in this realm, doctors, what is the key takeaway from all this? What did your research show you, and how do we best understand and appreciate the conclusions, and why does it matter?
So for me personally, I think the biggest surprise was how close, in terms of their complexity, these sequences from the Swabian origination already are in comparison to the earliest proto-cuneiform. This was something I totally did not expect. In fact, I did some pilot analyses where I had later periods of Sumerian spoken so spoken Sumerian encoded in signs, so later periods of Uruk. And there I got the result which I expected, namely that this is already more complex than what we have in the Paleolithic. But then when we also had the earliest periods of Proto-Cuneiform in the analyses, we suddenly had this effect that the earliest Proto-Cuneiform is very similar in terms of its information density and complexity compared to what we have in the Aurignacian. So this was very surprising to me. I remember I had the result. I couldn't believe it myself. I took a screenshot. I sent it to Ewa. We talked about it. I checked again. And when you look at the sequences of signs, you start to realize what is going on. In the Aurignacian and also in the earliest Proto-Cuneiform, we have these repetitive sequences of the same sign types being used. And yeah, this is very similar. And so essentially, it means that already 35,000 years earlier, we had a sign system which was used deliberately to encode information and which had the complexity of what we have later on as well when genuine writing developed out of it. So this was a really surprising result. And I think this means that we need to understand signs in terms of their statistical properties and analyze the sequences based on data and statistics, and then maybe we can start to bootstrap more abstract theories from that.
So this is a rather revolutionary conclusion and something you never expected to find.
I certainly didn't expect to find this. I'm sure there were people out there who have written papers about this and speculated about it. I think what we did is we were able to measure it, to use data, use a database and measure it and show that this is indeed the case.
And for you, Ewa?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the result was very surprising because I also did not think that the overlap would be so strong. But also when you keep thinking about it, yes, these people had a complex culture. They produced figurines, they produced flutes, they had their own identity. So cognitively and behaviorally, they were like us, so that they were capable of, let's say, some sort of abstract thinking and encoding these thoughts. When you think deeper about it, it's after the study, it's not such a big surprise anymore. It's like, well, yeah, they did all of that. They very likely counted, they very likely observed the environment, they kept track of time. So yeah, it's kind of logical. And as you said, Chris, it's many people suspected this, that it is very complex and that these people were capable of doing such. But it was always just an idea. So what we did is just counting it and really computing it.
So what you're saying, I believe, is that there was a number of alternative working hypotheses, but there was not enough data or data analysis to support or really evaluate those, correct?
Yes. So the idea is that we were able to prove it using data and statistics to prove that, yes, it is indeed the case that these people had complex thoughts. I mean, it's kind of logical when you think about it, or at least for prehistorians, everybody would say, yes, these people were modern humans, so why shouldn't they think in complex manners? But to really prove it and on it and say, like, yes, see, this is the data, and you can replicate our results if you want to. I think this is the big.
Well, you're dealing with the subject matter of human cognition, and
yeah,
and to have data to work with, to talk about and think about, is somewhat remarkable, I believe, because you have this data set that is physical. It also is art. It also is representational.
Yeah.
And it has import unto each of the artifacts as well. And so to have this independent correlation between the cognitive processes of people 40,000 years ago, I'd say that's impressive, very impressive, and exciting.
Yeah, so of course you have to make certain assumptions. So for instance, the idea that cognition is reflected in information density, right? So if you're able to deal with sequences of a certain complexity, you're proving that you're able to process them in a certain way.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That is, I think in that sense, if you're willing to accept this, then yes, you can work with this type of data, right? I mean, there will always be researchers who say, oh, we have to be careful about connecting these signs to cognition directly. But
of course,
if you apply if you apply a sequence of, say, cross and dot and line, and you repeat the sequence cross dot line, in a sense, you're proving that you're able to use a very simple grammar. Namely, a line comes after a cross, or a dot comes after a cross, and a line comes after a dot. It's a very simple type of grammar. So, whatever this meant to you, you're proving that you're able to process such a grammar. And that's the way we can think about this. So,
and you also mentioned that there was a correlation with certain classes of objects and the complexity and frequency of those symbols.
Yes. Yeah.
And that has implications as well.
This is something that also goes into the same idea. I mean, we have the marks, we have the figurines. They are depictions of something people thought of. As I said, there is a choice behind it. And we can see also that there is a choice for certain types of signs with certain figurines. For example, human figurines never show crosses. They are found on, for example, mammals, so no crosses on humans. Dots are never present on tools. I mean, there is no reason why tools shouldn't have dots. They are the same size than the figurines. They are more or less the same material. So there is no practical, technical reason why we do not find dots on tools. So we see, again, there is a choice made behind it. And as you said, it's, of course, we think, when we think about cognitive archaeology, it's always the problem, what is the data? We need the hard data. The people are dead for a long time now. We cannot make IQ tests with them, right? So
they call archaeology anthropology of the dead.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So you have to somehow extract the knowledge out of what the people left behind.
Right.
And as archaeologists, we are always trained to, yes, you can have a lot of ideas, but when you don't have the material proof, your ideas are just air, right? So
they're just vaporware, as they call it. Smoke and mirrors.
Right.
So what should our what should our listeners take away from this almost hour-long discussion, from our analysis, our subject matter, what we've learned? Where do we go from here, and what should they now have a better understanding about?
Yeah, so my idea is, or my advice is, stay curious, ancestors.
Stay curious.
And the people like stay curious.
More
relate to data. Exactly. There is more to come. We are currently working on much more. So for now, we showed the results on the Swabian origination assemblage, which is quite narrow, spatially, almost 10,000 years in time. But this is obviously not all that there is in the Paleolithic. The Paleolithic, that the time where we were working on mainly spans about over 30,000 years, when we talk only about the Upper Paleolithic. What is going on before? What did Neanderthals leave behind in terms of this behavior?
Yes.
Currently we are driving throughout Europe, visiting museums and collections, and I'm there again with my microscope, counting lines, right?
More
and
to come.
I can already tell you there's much more to come. So for now, I can tell you have already almost 4,000 objects from the literature. Wow. Around 1,000 objects that I have examined firsthand. And there will be more questions. Okay, what is coming after the origination in the Swabian Jura? What is with the origination in southwest France? What is later periods?
I had no idea there was so many objects. 4,000 is an incredible assemblage. Incredible. Absolutely.
And we're not done yet. So
we're not done yet, gang.
So we're not done
Hang
yet.
in there. Yeah. We haven't done sewing yet. You can chop, you can dice, you can cut. we're sewing.
Exactly.
Yeah. But here's the team. When I think about those adherents, I'm obsessed with them, needless to say. I think that, as it's been discussed, these are potential postures that are equivalent to a term we use as transcendence, a connection from the celestial to the terrestrial, from the divine to the mundane. Do you agree with that?
Whew, that's a difficult question.
I know.
I mean, there's always something when humans look up to the sky. I think there is always some sort, and probably it has forever been there, looking at the night sky, looking at the sun, that there is something around that you see, but you cannot reach physically. So I'm very sure that
some sort of reverence for the nature of the cosmos. How's that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, maybe you want to touch it. Maybe you want, I mean, when you look up, you automatically raise your head, and also you stand there in awe. And that, this posture probably always was something that humans did when they looked up to the sky and admired what they're seeing and imagining what is going on there, what these changing behaviors of some stars mean, what is with lunar eclipses, what is with shooting stars, that humans always look up and wonder at what is going on there. I think that's a human universal feature.
What do you think, Chris?
For the wild theory.
Well, I would come back to Earth, I think.
Yeah. You don't like solid ground. You don't like to fly in the celestial sphere.
Well, one thing I can say, I thought about it the other day. I remember we went to a conference in Halle very early on, Ewa. You might remember this. It was on the Mesolithic. And there was a researcher who also talked about the ethnographic parallels, right, from Mesolithic, in this case, Mesolithic material. And he did research on the Evenki in northern Siberia.
Yes.
And what I found really fascinating is that they lived a kind of hunter-gatherer lifestyle. And they had certain colors. They had bead colors like white, blue, and black. And then, they had their culture and their complex ways of dressing and so on. And the interesting thing was that I thought to myself, actually, if I had gone there just observing them from the outside, not talking to them, not learning their language, just observing them, you would have thought, okay, these people are hunter-gatherers. They are maybe herders of animals, and they have certain patterns that they like. But actually, what this anthropologist said is that everything they do is somehow connected to deeper myths. Like the colors are connected to the heavens, and they're connected to them, and they're connected to the Hades, so to the underworld. And even the way they put their tripods, right, when they cook something, is somehow connected to the stars. So, that kind of showed me that if you just observe this from the outside, you might think, okay, there is nothing really going on that is symbolic. But if you talk to the people, you start to understand actually everything they do is symbolic.
That's a great place to put a bow on it. It was good. Fantastic.
But the problem still is, just let me say this. The problem is that in the case of archaeology, we only find these material remains. So, and that is what we have to go with. And we have often lost these myths that surrounded them, which doesn't mean that they weren't there, but it's really hard to prove, how these things.
Very much so. Well, I think that's it, gang. We've done our job.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Oh, yes. I'm honored to have you both on. See you on the flip-flop, gang. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.archpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. The Archaeology Podcast Network's chief editor is Rachel Roden. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy. Our social media and newsletter coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht. The APN was founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle on December 1st, 2014. We're supported by our amazing podcast hosts, many volunteers, and listeners like you. Check out membership at www.archpodnet.com/members.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.